It's Ron from RGM Music here. Today I want to do a more advanced PBC programming tutorial. What we're going to do is set up an additional button page on the PBC to control the looper and other features on a Strymon timeline. This is a common thing that a lot of users are doing, and so we figured we'd use this as a good example for using some of the advanced programming features. The PBC uses a concept that's called button pages, where each page can have completely different functions for each one of your buttons. If you go to the button tab here, you can look at what the buttons are configured for on each page. Here we have page 1, which is what you get when you start up the PBC, and it's got the preset buttons bank up and bank down, and a few other buttons that allow you to access some other button pages. When you press the loops button on page 1, it brings you to page 2, and this page has 10 buttons that allow you to turn the individual audio loops on and off, and a button that returns you back to page 1. Page 3 is accessed by pressing the switches button on the first page, and this one has switches for the function switches, the 2 outputs, 3 buffers, etc. So what we want to do is set up a fourth button page that has buttons specifically configured for the timeline. But what we need to do first is a bit of setup. So we go to the Global tab here, set the maximum button page to 4. Now it's going to let us deal with 4 button pages. Then we're going to go to the Devices page, and by default we have a mini effect gizmo here, but which we don't have in this system, so we're going to change the manufacturer to Strymon, and the model automatically changes to Timeline. None of the other settings you should have to deal with except for MIDI channel, which in our case is MIDI channel 1 for our pedal. Now we can go to the Buttons tab and get to work. We'll use the page buttons to get over to page 4. You'll see that it's blank right now, and now we can start populating it with our buttons. Some of the quick editing features are accessible using a right button click on these virtual buttons here, or on a Mac, if you don't have a right button, control click will do the same thing. And so we right click here, and you want to say assign CC, and here you'll see timeline, and it will list all of your MIDI devices you've defined here. And we're going to call this the looper stop button, and yes, we want to convert it to instant access. Instant access buttons are the general purpose buttons that can be programmed to do a bunch of different functions, and we'll get into more of that later. And let's continue, and we'll assign CC timeline looper play and timeline looper record. And we'll keep assigning more looper functions. I like to have the looper undo here and the looper redo here. And then we can use some of the pedal's other functions. We can up here put the infinite repeat, and we'll also put the looper speed control here. And then over here we're going to use a different kind of button, and this is the first time we'll actually need to go in and double click the button, which brings up the full edit screen. And what we're going to do is set the button type to device PC minus, and what this does is it shifts the device down by 1 preset, and so this allows you to kind of step through the presets on the device, and you'll see that it's automatically set to timeline. And so we hit that, and then go over here and set this one to device PC plus. And so now these buttons will let you go through all the presets in the timeline without having to worry about getting into the setup mode or using the editor to get there. We have one other button over here. What we'll do is let's assign that to, let's see, what do we have left here? We do have the looper reverse, so we can put that there. May as well use all of our buttons. And so now we have this button here that what we're going to use this for is switching to and from this button page. Just like we use the loops button and the switches button to get to pages 2 and 3 respectively, we need another button to get to page 4. And when we're on page 4, we need to be able to get back to page 1. So what we're going to do is get into the double click edit screen here. We're going to set this to instant access, and whenever you're using a button that switches pages, the settings you want to have here, you want to turn send on preset change off, update on preset change off, and momentary on. And what this does is it makes sure that the button only triggers when you press it, and it doesn't stay on. Like a button that would turn on, say, audio loop 5, when you press it, you want it to stay on because you want audio loop 5 to stay on until you press it again, and then it turns off. With a page button, of course, it's just a momentary, instantaneous thing. You press it once, it switches to the page, and then the next time you press that button again, you want it to switch to the page again. So you don't have really a concept of the button turning on and off, but just triggering instantly when you press it. Also, the send and update preset change buttons are turned off here, and that just means that we're not actually storing the state of this button and trying to recall it later like we would with a loops button. You know, you can go in and program a preset to turn on certain loops and store it that way, where you never want that to happen with a button that simply changes from one page to another. Hope that makes sense. Otherwise, just trust me, this is the way you want it to set up. So now that we've got the checkboxes set, we hit New Action, and we set the action type to System, and the subtype to Page, which it already is, and then we set the page number to 1. So what that means is when we press this button, it's just going to jump to page 1, and that's all that we really need. We can name this button, we'll call it Presets, because that's what we call a button that jumps back to the Presets page. And like the other buttons in the PBC that jump pages, we also have a second function on them. When you hold the button for 2 seconds, it will store the current state of your buttons. And so this is going to be really useful when you're using the device PC up and down buttons to select which preset you want on the timeline. You can use the store button to remember that. So you can say, for example, select a preset on the PBC, go over to this new button page, and say like, well, I want, preset 27 to come up on my timeline using those device PC buttons. And then you hold this button we're editing here, and it will store that to the preset. So next time you come back to the preset on the PBC, you're going to automatically call up preset 27 on your timeline. So to do that, we switch the button mode from normal to hold, and now we see we have button settings and hold functions. And so now we switch over here, and now this is what the button is going to do when we hold it for 2 seconds. So we're going to set the button type to IA store, and that's all we need to do. So when we hold the button, it's going to store any changes we've made. So we can hit done now. So now you can see our changes here. This button accesses presets or IA store when it's held. And we can go in and change some of the colors of these buttons to make more sense. The default colors are blue when the button is off, and aqua when the button is turned on. Of course, we want something different, and so what we'll do is we'll start with this one, and the looper stop button. We will basically, we don't want it on at all when the button is turned off, and we'll say that it's yellow when the looper is stopped. The other important thing to do for these first 3 looper buttons is to set group number 1. Or if you're using group number 1 somewhere else, you would use a different number. But basically what that means is that buttons that have the same group number are sort of locked together so that pressing one button turns off the other buttons in the group. So for these looper buttons, it makes sense because you're either, stopped, you're playing, or you're recording. And so pressing record will turn off the stop button, and then if you went and pressed play, you would turn off the record button, and so it just keeps the state of the buttons correct for what you want them to do. Okay, so that's the stop button. Now let's do the play button, and we'll set this one to be green when it's on and black when it's off. Again, we set it to group 1. And again, on the record button, group 1, red when it's on, black when it's off. So what I'm going to do, instead of wasting time in the video, I'm going to quick change some of these other buttons to colors that seem to make sense to me. Okay, like magic here. All right, a few other things we need to do before we're done. We can set the page name to something else. We're going to set it to Timeline. So that shows up on the main screen to tell us where we're at. And then we want to go back to page 1, and now we need to make sure that there's a button on page 1 that allows us to get to page 4 in the first place. So we're going to take this global preset button and we're going to override it and make it a timeline button. We'll change the name to timeline, and then we're going to take this action here that called up the global preset, and instead of doing that, we want to switch pages to page 4. And that's all we need to do. One last feature that'll be really useful in this, we have the show button names checkbox here, and when you turn it on, a little pop-up window appears in the main screen when you press a button telling you what the button actually does. And so especially if you're using additional pages where you need more of a reference of what the buttons are supposed to be doing, this becomes really handy. Okay, and now we can just send these settings down to our PBC and see how they work. Okay, now that we have our PBC loaded up, we can show you how that works. If we hold the tap button on the timeline, it gets into the looper mode, and we don't necessarily need to do that, except that we want to see the LEDs change on the front of the timeline as we hit things on the PBC. And as we programmed it, we hit the function button to bring us to the timeline page. And then the first 3 buttons here are stop, play, and record. So to start going, you would start recording. You see that the red lights go on both the timeline and the PBC. And then you can either keep pressing this button to go between dub and record. And that's the only one that doesn't change on the PBC, but it will change on the timeline. But each press will switch you between dubbing and playing. And then you can also hit play to get you back into the play mode, and stop. So that's pretty much it. The grouping takes care of turning off a button, one of the other buttons when you press a new one. The other buttons, undo and redo, things like that, don't change. They just are kind of a one-shot kind of button. If we exit the looper mode here so we can see the preset names, if I press the PC up button, you can see that it goes now from 0A to 0B, and you're going to 1A, 1B, and we kind of step up through the presets, and this will step down through the presets. Then, if we wanted to, for example, save this 2B preset setting to the current PBC setting, we just hold the function button until the screen says stored. And now on PBC preset 1, on the timeline, we select bank 2B. And we can do that for other ones as well. We can hit this, get us back to the preset page here. Let's say we'll select preset 2, and then go back to the timeline page, and then step up to say now we're selecting preset 5A on the timeline, and we can store that to preset 2 on the PBC. Now when we go back, now we can go to preset 1, and the timeline changes, and I hit preset 2, the timeline changes again. Anyway, so that pretty much covers the basic functionality. If you have any other questions, please email us at support@rjmmusic.com. Thanks!